So I'm Nick Dunlop. I'm the Secretary General of the Climate Parliament, which is a global network of legislators that has played a pretty big role over the last few years, as you'll hear in the course of the discussion, in putting together the Green Grids Initiative. The Climate Parliament is part of the Climate Compatible Growth Consortium, which consists of the universities of Cambridge, Loughborough, Imperial College, Oxford, University College London, and the Climate Parliament, plus one or two others. But you can probably spot the odd one out. It's a great privilege for us to work with all the distinguished researchers and academics from these famous universities on trying to figure out the answer to the biggest question facing the human race today, which is how are we going to make the energy transition globally, in all parts of the world, from fossil fuels to clean energy, fast enough to stay within a safe global carbon budget and keep temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. Nobody knows all the answers for how to do that, and that's why having some of the world's most brilliant minds from some of the world's most famous universities working on the problem through this new consortium, Climate Compatible Growth, is so important. And important too for the Green Grids Initiative, which has been launched this week in Glasgow by first Prime Ministers Johnson and Modi on Tuesday during the World Leaders Summit, and then yesterday in a ministerial event where we had the energy ministers of the UK, the United States, Nigeria, the French Foreign Minister, the Indian Environment Minister, the Prime Minister of Samoa, and others presenting the Green Grids Initiative to a live audience, so to speak, in the COP. We already have working groups underway made up of, in particular, international agencies and multilateral development banks, most of the major international agencies working in this field. And for some of those working groups, including the Finance Working Group, which is led by the Green Climate Fund, the Climate Compatible Growth Team is providing essential research support and actually, really helping the governments and the agencies to do the thinking about how to step up the pace and scale of building the new clean energy infrastructure that we need. Now, we have some brilliant panelists here. One is not here, and that's Barry Gardiner, MP, a member of the British Parliament, who's played a key role in this, being an old friend of Prime Minister Modi. He had to be in Edinburgh this morning, and we told him that's fine because we have so many other brilliant panelists that we'll hardly miss him. So we're going to hear from 5 people, and I'll introduce them one by one as we come to them. The first is Will Blyth, who is a Senior Research Fellow in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office responsible for energy, but he is also on loan, so to speak, from the Foreign Office to the COP26 unit in the Cabinet Office. And he is, it's not an exaggeration to say really that Will is a co-founder of the Green Grids Initiative as we know it today, because he's the person who championed it in the Cabinet Office team and brought it in as one of the major projects that the UK COP presidency would take up and launch in Glasgow, which it has now done in style. But if it wasn't for Will spotting a good idea a long time ago, I mean, more than a year ago, then we wouldn't be sitting here celebrating the launch of what is now undoubtedly the biggest ever global coalition on clean energy. So, Will, with that, why don't we pass the word to you and you say whatever you want to say about the Green Grids Initiative.
Thank you very much, Nick, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I guess it's been a really big week for this initiative, and we're sitting here the day after Energy Day, where a lot of progress was made in the COP negotiations just down the road here. I don't want to talk too much about that, but I think it's probably worth just reflecting the context of COP26 and how this all fits into that landscape, because I think it was a pretty impressive day yesterday. Essentially, the COP presidency has been working towards a big sort of set of announcements on energy for the past almost 2 years now. And the theme of that was really moving beyond coal towards clean. That was the big sort of slogan. And just to think about coal, I mean, coal isn't necessarily the most important fuel for many of the countries we're interested in for Green Grids Initiative, but I think it sets an important context, certainly from a climate point of view in the energy system globally. So in terms of what was agreed yesterday for coal, essentially the idea was along 4 tracks. Firstly was to increase the number of countries committing to phase out of coal. Secondly was to increase or to get an agreement from the countries who finance coal beyond their borders to phase out finance. Thirdly was to put in place the kind of conditions that are needed to make clean alternatives viable. So that you can't just shut coal down. You've got to have something else instead. And thirdly was a just transition to reflect the fact that a lot of economies are deeply kind of economically embedded in coal. And again, you've got to have a way of transferring that economics smoothly so that you're not just shutting jobs down. So on all 4 of those, I think we've made huge progress. On the phase-out side, they had 28 new countries in the Powering Past Coal Alliance. So from OECD, that's mainly, it's not just OECD countries, but it's kind of mainly an OECD thing. So they've gone from 1/3 of OECD countries have now signed up to that to 2/3. It still leaves a few big players out, but it's getting quite a broad coverage now. And there were some important countries who came out with new phase-out commitments. So South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, Poland, and Ukraine all came out with coal phase-out commitments. And you just think about the politics of that. I mean, just from a European perspective for a moment, having Poland committing to coal phase-out, it's a huge issue in terms of the politics of climate change within Europe. And I think quite astonishing that Poland is now ahead of Germany in terms of that commitment. I think Germany was almost there, but they're not. It's slightly unfair because they don't have a government quite in place. I think they probably would have done, and they probably will do soon. But anyway, I think that it really shows the sort of shift and momentum and the power of peer pressure that governments taking commitments and starting to be exposed if you're not making commitments can make. So I've been really impressed at what peer pressure can do. I wasn't convinced that framework was going to help. Anyway, coming back to how this all fits in. Essentially, if you're going to get rid of fossil fuels from the system, you've got to have something viable to replace it with, and this is where the Green Grids initiative comes in. So. As the IEA they've made some good sort of headline statements recently. One of the points they made recently was that electricity has never been so cheap as it is now in the whole kind of history since electricity was invented. And it's a kind of a really sort of stunning historical moment that we're at. And for those of us who have been working on energy for quite a long time, I think we sort of tend to think about energy as a trilemma. The sort of kind of you're always trying to compromise between economics, environment, and security. And I think essentially the trilemma in my mind is now gone. All of that has now collapsed down into a single technical challenge of delivering reliable electricity. There isn't no compromise to be made between economics and environment anymore. It is about delivering secure, reliable and cost-effective electricity, and that is within reach. But it's not an easy challenge to overcome, because although the electrons themselves are cheap, you've got to get them to where they need to be at the time they're needed in the quantity they're needed, and that's where grids comes in. And that's why I was so pleased to come across this great idea that Climate Parliament have been championing around green grids, because I think it's such a great idea. It's something it's the next frontier for making clean energy a viable alternative to fossil fuels, to really connect up sources of electricity from where it's cheap to produce to where it's needed, and that could be cross borders, it could be really large scale, it could be much smaller scale, and in my view, this whole question of whether the solution is mega grids or whether it's small grids, I think that is because of the nature of renewables being so different from fossil fuel generation. In my view, you need something that connects the small scale with the big scale, because the big scale is where the cheap electrons is going to be. The small scale is where it gets used, and you've got to be really smart around how you shift that around at a local level. But you're not going to generate cheap electrons in the middle of a city where land prices are sky high. So you've got to have that balance between big and small, and getting those things connected in the right way is a big technical challenge. It's got political challenges in there as well, especially when you're trading electricity across borders. You've got to be able to trust your neighbours that they're not going to cut you off. There's geopolitical elements to all of this. So it's super exciting. So I think, anyway, I'm going to stop talking because I could go on all morning, and you can bring me back in again at a suitable moment. But I think there's a new three-way thing. So we've got rid of the trilemma. There's still three groups of things we've got to sort out. One is the technical challenge. We know how to do this, but we're still learning. There's still new technologies about how to connect smart grids to the macro grids that need to be done. We've got to get the money sorted out, and that's part of this whole Green Grids initiative kind of consortium and ecosystem. Is we've got the banks on board, the multilateral development banks. We're talking to climate bonds initiatives, thinking about the role of private money in all of this. And last but certainly not least on my list is the politics. And the politics really, without getting that right, nothing will get built. You can have great plans, and the multilateral development banks have told us this. They've got great plans, they think they're financeable, they're ready to go, and it gets blocked by the politics. And that happens all over the world. So I think those three things is our new trilemma that we have to address, and I think Climate Parliament have been doing a fantastic job, particularly on the politics side, and we've got other parts of the CCG consortium helping on the technical challenges and how to overcome those. So I think we've got a really great consortium to help address this issue. Thanks very much, Nick.
All right. Well, thank you, Will, for that really good introduction. And I'm delighted to hear your three-point checklist, because I just before you said it, I just wrote it down, just as a little checklist to help me remember that we need to hit all 3 points. What I wrote down is exactly the same: political will, expertise, and finance. This is the result of a lot of thinking that's been going on in the British government, in the CCG consortium, in the Climate Parliament. What do we actually have to do to hugely accelerate the energy transition everywhere? And that's as good a checklist as any, I think. That first, we've got to generate a lot more political will to get governments to take the lead on stepping up the pace. Secondly, we have to feed in expertise. Another way of thinking about that is help the governments do the thinking, or even sometimes do the thinking for them. Governments are very short-term focused. There's a lot of bureaucratic inertia in each government. Often the best ideas, and I know this from a lifetime of experience of working with governments at a high level, the best ideas come in from outside. They come from academia. They come from NGOs. I'm sure you'll agree with this, Will, as an ideas man who's inside the government. And then finance, we got to figure out how to mobilize enough finance, and there is enough finance. There's $100 trillion in the bond markets, but how can governments create the incentives that make building the new clean energy infrastructure bankable, and so that those bond investors will put the tiny fraction of their money, which is all we need, into building a new clean energy system around the world. Now, how did we get to this? To this point. As you can tell from what Will was just saying, we're all rather excited this week because after a lot of work, it's all just, even in the last few weeks, it's come together in major countries like the United States. Or yesterday, I didn't even know the Nigerian energy minister was going to speak in the sort of presentation event, but there we had the minister from Africa's largest country really committing Nigeria to participate. So there's a kind of snowball effect getting going, which is really exciting to see. But it wasn't always like that. And one person who's been involved from very early in the process is my very distinguished colleague, Sergio Missana, who is the executive director of the Climate Parliament, the person who really runs the organization and keeps everything operating as it should. But he's not just that. He's very comfortable in an academic consortium like the Climate Compatible Growth Consortium, because he's also a part-time professor at the Latin America campus of Stanford University, which is the university where he did his doctorate. Probably got 100%, I expect. Sergio is Chilean. And Stanford asked him to teach their students about Spanish literature. And the reason they do this is that he is also a well-known novelist in Chile and in Latin America. When Sergio writes a new novel, it's, the newspapers all run huge sort of full-page spreads about it and so on. He has been a finalist for the Latin American, the Spanish literature equivalent of the Booker Prize, which is called the Romulo Gallegos Prize. He hasn't won it yet, but I'm sure he will in due course when he writes a novel about his experience with the Green Grids Initiative. Sergio goes back to the days when the Green Grids Initiative was a sort of orphan idea, and he and I were disconsolately wandering from country to country, talking to energy ministers, trying to find donors who'd be interested in funding it. None were. That's still the case, by the way, if any donors are listening. This is, as I have been saying to our brilliant Climate Parliament staff team recently, this initiative is a good example of the ancient principle that persistence pays. We just kept plugging away at it until Will finally took pity on us, picked up the idea. The UK COP presidency took it forward, and since then it's been like sitting in the back seat of a Rolls Royce, speeding down the motorway. Anyway, you can say, Sergio, if you agree with the way I've characterized it, but over to you, Sergio.
Thank you, Nick. I was in a panel here the other day talking about green grids more broadly, not only the Green Grids Initiative, and I was having the privilege to share the position of panelists with our colleague Abhishek, who's now in the audience, and he was mentioning Buckminster Fuller, basically to express the fact that grids are not new as an idea and as a technology. And Buckminster Fuller was a very famous architect, inventor, futurist, and many other things, a visionary who devoted his life to trying to answer, maybe put in rather simplistic terms, but what would be the key technological advance, or what is the key technological innovation that has the potential to increase the well-being and development of human beings all over the world? What is the key technology to achieve the most important and crucial results? And his answer was grids. So it's good to have that in mind, that this idea has been going on for a long time. I wanted to emphasize that we are the Climate Parliament, so the point of departure for us is the climate crisis, and we're always thinking about grids and about renewable energy from the point of view of the crisis, and always taking into account the severity and the threat that we're all facing. An American intellectual some time ago said that humanity is currently facing a small crisis and a big crisis, the small crisis being COVID. And I was Googling yesterday, and we are at 5 million deaths worldwide from COVID, which is a horrible human catastrophe, but also it has had, of course, economic impacts, disruption of the supply chain and all the things that we know. But it's amazing to think that this is the small crisis, almost like a dress rehearsal for the disruptions that could happen as a consequence of the big crisis, which is, of course, the climate crisis. So again, I'm not going to go into detail. I said a few words the other day about just the human impact of that we can expect during this century is if we go as we're going, if the process of commitments by the countries continue on the road they're in. So again, the other key idea for us is that there is enough renewable energy resources in the world to power the economy many times over. I'm from Chile, as Nick was saying. There was a study conducted by the Inter-American Development Bank for Latin America a few years ago, trying to answer the question, what percentage of the energy demand can you meet with renewable energy? And actually, they were excluding large hydro. So just basically solar, wind, and other resources like geothermal, perhaps energy from the ocean. What percentage of total demand can you satisfy with renewable energy? And their finding was 100%, 66 times over. So but obviously, we need to increase demand for development and for the planet. But still with, of course, triple demand, still there is plenty of renewable energy, just basically solar and wind, to satisfy the demand many times over. Also, very briefly, there was a study conducted by NREL some years ago asking a different question. If you put in the United States, but this would be valid for many other countries, if you put rooftop panels on every viable building and house that was facing in the right direction, what percentage of the energy supply would you be able to provide? And their answer was 40%. So if we think that we have to at least double the production of electricity in developing countries, triple or quadruple, local production is not enough. So it's fundamental, and community grids and distributed generation is crucial. It's a crucial part of the Green Grids Initiative. But you do need the grids. You do need to be able to carry electricity, clean electricity from the places where it's most abundant, and at least areas that are beyond the current weather system, or extend the solar day so you can generate at a place and meet peak demand, and in areas where, for instance, the sun is no longer shining. So that was the sort of the eureka moments that happened at some point, connecting these ideas into the fact that grids are fundamental, even though the investment that is going to be needed is going to be mostly generation. So grids, a bit like Buckminster Fuller was envisioning, is an economic enabler, and that's why energy access is so fundamental where there's still a situation of energy poverty. But in a way, grids are an enabler for generation. So, sorry, Nick, for taking a lot of time, but we started having these conversations with MPs, and MPs engaged with governments. There was in 2014 a letter from our group in India to Prime Minister Modi, precisely trying to engage him in this idea. At that point, they were calling it a solar Silk Road. Again, this idea of transferring east to west. Actually, a secretary of the Ministry of New or Renewable Energy some years ago told us about this idea that also we've heard in the US of the grid operating as storage. If you're moving the electrons around, you're saving storage. And this secretary was telling us that for each 10 degrees of longitude, meaning transition east to west, you're saving 1 hour of storage, or in a way you're extending the solar day if you're going east to west. We had a meeting in 2015 in Lucerne with MPs, and that's when one member of our team, our Asia director, Mukul Sharma, came up with the name Green Grid, at that point Green Grid Initiative. We were already engaging with the government of China, who had been thinking of this, and of course the government of India. And at the COP in Paris, we started engaging with, as Nick was saying, with ministers. So we brought this idea to ministers of energy all over the world, starting at that COP and then going in different venues and in different moments, traveling around the world, coming back for the COP. And basically we found a lot of interest from ministers, and they agreed in principle to join a Green Grid Initiative, as we were calling it then. In the area where I'm from, in Latin America, ministers from Chile, Argentina, Peru, Brazil, Mexico, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, in Africa, among others, Tanzania, Uganda, Tunisia, Ethiopia, Morocco, also India, Mongolia, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Jordan, Samoa, and other countries. So we found a lot of interest. In 2018 we organized a planning meeting where many of these governments and others, including northern countries, including the UK, came to Mexico City for planning this initiative. And we actually, in that meeting, drafted a political declaration that governments could issue, basically for national leaders to support this idea of community grids and large-scale grids, and also smart grids that could integrate electric vehicles, working on finance, etc., which is a declaration that has been issued this week by a number of countries, but I will let my colleagues get into that. And then briefly to wrap up, last year there was, in 2015, there was a crucial meeting between the leader of our group in India, Dr. Sanjay Jaiswal, MP, and Prime Minister Modi, who got very interested in this idea. And then last year, a key MP and trustee from the UK, Barry Gardiner, again met with Mr. Modi, and Prime Minister Modi reiterated his interest in this idea, in this project, which would later become the idea of one sun, one world, one grid. So this year, we, as Nick was saying, a key development was the engagement with the UK, and in which Will has had such a key role to play in creating a coalition that includes researchers, mostly from the Climate and Compatible Growth program, but also international development banks, of course, the UK presidency, also regulators, system operators, international multilateral development banks, and other international organizations creating working groups, and others. So we've created a broad coalition that interfaces with the Green Grids Initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid network, which is a government-to-government collaboration to move this agenda forward. And that's how we come to COP26 and the announcement by Prime Minister Modi. But Nick, that's a detailed history, but I'll leave it at that.
That's great, Sergio, thanks. And that really sort of creates the context. And I think probably for some of the people here, and the I suspect considerable number listening in online. It's quite interesting to hear how something like this gets put together, and it's partly persistence, as I said earlier, and it's partly an element of luck. Just to pick up on that one moment that Sergio just mentioned, when Barry Gardiner met with his old friend Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, and said, look, we've been developing this idea. Would you be interested in participating in launching a Green Grids initiative in Glasgow at COP26? And the Prime Minister said, sure, I would. Yeah, in principle, great. And I happened to be at Wilton Park, which is part of the UK government that's involved in this project, acting as a convener. I was at a meeting there, which was a Foreign Office meeting, and so was Will and one of his colleagues, the, I think, Deputy Director of the COP26 unit, Simon Sharp, a very far-seeing Cabinet Office official who's been one of the people preparing the COP. And I spoke to Barry and our Asia Director, Mukul, just after Barry had emerged from his meeting with the Prime Minister and another meeting that he had joined by the chair of our India group, Sanjay Jaiswal, with the Indian Minister of Power, who kind of reiterated the message that India was very interested in participating in this at COP26. So I got a briefing on the phone. A very short while later, Will and Simon and I were sitting in the very grand bar at Wilton Park, which lives in one of those stately homes in Sussex. And I reported to them, and Will had already been sort of bringing this into the Cabinet Office team. But I think, Will, you probably confirm that was a critical moment. When we heard that the Prime Minister of India was ready in principle to participate, I think for Simon, that was a moment when he felt he could say, yeah, we will definitely get behind this and take it up as one of the things we try to do in Glasgow. And it was, it's just that kind of international networking, a meeting, a phone call, another meeting, and gradually things pick up speed. Now, there's already some very good questions coming in on the screen behind me, and one of them has been, what are the next practical steps to make it happen post-COP? And that's a very good question. And our next speaker on our brilliant panel here is going to begin to answer that question, just in terms of how we see the work going forward. And our next speaker is Lucy Pearson, who's the program manager of the Climate Parliament. She has been the person keeping all the balls in the air as we've moved towards launching the Green Grids initiative this week in Glasgow. And she is really brilliant at keeping all the balls in the air and keeping track of everything and making sure that nothing gets missed. We have other members of our team who've been doing exactly the same thing who are here, like Léa Hilero from Bordeaux, who's been doing a similar job. But Lucy is the person on our team who's full-time coordinating the Green Grids initiative, and since she joined us, she's been playing just an absolutely central role. She's from Australia. I'm a New Zealander, and I just want to say that we New Zealanders love our Australian neighbours, even though they're 6 times as big and may sometimes forget that we're there. But we love them on one condition, and that is that they continue to let us win the annual rugby competition between the two nations, as they've been kind enough to do for the last 20 years or so. If they start winning, we may revise our opinion. But no, Lucy is the best of Australia. She's not only a brilliant program manager for the Climate Parliament, I do have to say that she's a brilliant representative of the sports-mad culture that we both come from down there in Australasia. And Mark Howells, the mastermind of the Climate Compatible Growth Project, comes from a similar sports-mad culture in South Africa, and we compete with them. But Lucy at one point represented Australia at a very tender age internationally in the ancient sport of karate, in which she has a black belt. I could go on about her sporting accomplishments, but I think that's sufficient. We were hearing last night over dinner, she got her black belt in karate at the age of 11. I think that and won the Australian Open karate competition at that point, which shows that she's someone who, when she puts her mind to something, she gets results, and you better not stand in her way. So, with that, Lucy, nobody needs to feel nervous. We'll only send Lucy if we really run into a bureaucratic blockage somewhere. Lucy, you're going to tell us a little bit about how we're going to structure the work going forward. So over to you.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks everyone. I think the moment I told Nick about my history in karate was quite critical for my time at Climate Parliament. It's been sort of used ever since if anyone is refusing to transition to renewable energy. But yes.
I have to just recount a moment when we were discussing what the name of the government-to-government group would be. Mm-hmm. Lucy was on the call. We were discussing it with the International Solar Alliance, and one of their senior people said we were kind of going back and forth on different versions of the name. And one of them said, well, now that I know that Lucy has a black belt in karate, I think we'll go with that option. So it really works.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Absolutely. I'm a passive tool now. But yeah, no, thanks very much. I'm quite new to the world of energy and climate and so on, but just to say quickly, it's been an absolute thrill to work on such a critical initiative as the Green Grids this year and help to sort of carry the wave that's been building for 6-7 years that Nick and Sergio have founded and built to this point, and then Will's taken forward so expertly. To bring it to the launch on Tuesday was an absolute pleasure. But as Nick said, I've been sort of doing my best to help coordinate things in the background, both within the Climate Parliament and working closely with Will and colleagues in the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department in the UK. To again organise it and plan for the years ahead. So we've been saying the COP launch is just the beginning. Now the real work begins. But just to touch on the structure briefly, I think we've mentioned a number of the working groups and the role of the Climate Compatible Growth Programme and so on. But the way we're looking at the Green Grids initiative and its partnership with the One Sun, One World, One Grid is like a Venn diagram. So if you imagine the two circles, the center point is the partnership between the Green Grids initiative and the One Sun, One World, One Grid vision, which is a government-to-government process, as Nick's touched upon. And on the OSAWOG, the One Sun, One World, One Grid side, that's the sort of Modi's vision of a global grid. It's about the regional and continental interconnections, which deal with the issue of variability in renewable energy. And that's a government process. On the Green Grids Initiative side, we see it as a much broader coalition of the willing and partnerships, which are helping to, again, identify and fill the gaps that are needed to help bring the vision of the Green Grids Initiative to life, which is accelerating the construction of the new infrastructure we need for a world powered by clean energy. So just to touch upon quickly, I'll give a bit more detail about what's going on underneath the Green Grids Initiative already. As I mentioned, we have a number of working groups, both regional and thematic or policy-based, as well as the role of research teams and other partnerships. So obviously, we're in a climate-compatible growth session today, so the CCG team are playing an absolutely critical role on bringing sort of research to bear and expertise on a lot of these issues that are still to be resolved globally. So just to touch upon two brief studies, and I won't go into it in detail because I'm not the expert here, but for example, there's the Gulf Undersea India study that the team worked on earlier this year, which is looking at the techno-economic and financial considerations for an interconnection between West Bengal in India, I believe, and Oman. Which has proved, I believe, in 75% of the scenarios that it's the most commercially viable option. And then In addition to that, one of the working groups that developed under the Green Grids Initiative earlier this year through the Energy Transition Council working group that we'll help to convene, it was looking at finance, so sort of trying to deal with or find solutions to the problem in that a lot of grid projects that need to happen globally don't currently qualify for climate finance, the billions of dollars of climate finance that are out there, because grids themselves don't emit any carbon. But I won't say a lot about that, because I know that next session's coming up is going to go into detail about the finance working paper. But it's one of the most critical products that's come out of the Green Grids Initiative groups so far, and I believe the paper was published on Monday. So that's a critical role that, again, that the team are playing so far. So that work will continue with the finance working group. The other working groups that have developed and will continue to expand are an Africa working group, a regional working group, which is led by the African Development Bank under the auspices of the African Union Commission. And that launched formally, I believe, about 5-6 weeks ago. So that's convening, again, the African Development Bank, the various African power pools, US Aid and their Power Africa project, and others together to really again, convene the right people around the table and sort of support and facilitate some of these existing initiatives like the PDPAP2, which is about priority infrastructure projects in Africa, and the African single electricity market. Again, putting the weight and resource behind these existing programs and initiatives to try and, again, get the speed and scale we need to move things faster. So the whole point of the GGI is not to duplicate any efforts that are already existing, it's to add the convening power and the weight and resource that we have globally in the institutions, the academic organizations, the not-for-profits and civil society like the Climate Parliament, and to put all our weight behind those. So in addition to the Africa Working Group, we've convened an Asia-Pacific Working Group this year, which will formally launch in Q1 next year, but that is being led by the UN Economic and Social Commission for the Asia and the Pacific, UNESCAP. And our membership includes the ASEAN Centre for Energy and the South Asian Centre for Renewable Energy, as well as the Climate Parliament and UK teams as well. And that's looking, again, to help sort of bring more people to bear for the regional roadmap on power connectivity that the UNESCAP have produced and have signed off for the mandate from their 53 member states already. So that's underway, and that will continue to build next year. Again, we'll bring in more partners. We're identifying, I think they call it a bit of an alphabet soup in Asia Pacific, where there's lots of initiatives and programs going on everywhere in different organizations, but they don't always talk to each other too well. So our role is to identify where those gaps are and link them up, and again, have the 1 + 1 = 3. In addition to those working groups, we have announced on Wednesday, I believe, an initiative titled the Regulators Energy Transition Accelerator, which is led by Ofgem, now has 21 regulators globally, working together to, again, talk to each other, learn from each other, and accelerate what they're doing globally to harmonise regulations, to deal with some of the issues that exist that prevent some of these interconnections happening, or the work that needs to happen to scale up that transition. Similarly, there's a network of transmission or system operators that is developing with support from IRENA and the International Energy Agency. I believe that will launch next year as well. And then there's obviously all the work of the UK team and its partner Wilton Park in convening governments and dialogues, its role in the secretariat of the Green Grids Initiative and One Sun, One World, One Grid partnership. So we've got lots of different groups that we're bringing together into a cohesive whole to really, again, accelerate what's happening. And again, I see our role as critical, again, in knowing what's happening everywhere, connecting the right people, making sure we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're really putting all our weight and effort as this coalition of the willing to get the infrastructure built and to keep us below the 1.5 degree temperature rise. So I'll wrap up there. I'm sure if there's any questions, let me know. But the summary is that there's a lot of groundwork that's been laid already, and it will continue to build next year beyond these groups once we identify what needs happening.
Great, thanks
Nick.
Lucy. That's really clear and helpful. Some of the things Lucy has just mentioned. There's so much going on in this Green Grids initiative that it's easy to miss, but they're really big. They're really big developments. I mean, an energy transition regulatory accelerator, bringing together national energy regulators from many different countries, is an extraordinary thing. The energy regulators are so important in the national energy system in each country. And they're often very conservative. Their job is to keep the lights on, and they haven't always welcomed change. I see Mark nodding to that. We all know, anybody who's been trying to change the energy system knows that the regulators are not necessarily your biggest ally. And yet, here we are, as a result of this Green Grids initiative, we're getting dozens of regulators coming together in something called an Energy Transition Accelerator.
RETA for short.
Sorry?
RETA for short.
RETA, is it?
RETA. It was almost IRETA, but it was too close to Irina, so RETA.
There you are. Remember that acronym, RETA. That in itself could have powerful consequences later on. And this is what we're seeing happen, that the Green Grids Initiative is becoming a facilitator and a kind of a catalyst for all sorts of important and interesting coalitions and networks to form. And I may say that quite a lot of these coalitions and networks that we've seen forming in recent months have been the brainchild of Will Blyth, who's sitting here, who we'll come back to shortly. I just want to mention also that another of the first questions to come up, just to give people warning, is there a checklist for a country to be able to access climate finance for this Green Grids agenda? And since we've had a CCG team working on the finance working group, I think when our speakers have all spoken, Mark, I'm going to, if I may, if this is allowed by our technical people, there must be a microphone or something, I'll pass the word to you, and you can perhaps bring in Abhishek or whoever, and you could address that question, because it's a really interesting question. What boxes does a country have to tick to move finance either from multilaterals or even the private sector into this field? So I just mention it now so you can start thinking about it. In the meantime, you have a little time because we have two more brilliant speakers to come, and the next is Rana Ghoneim from the UN Industrial Development Organization. She and Jakob Mulagetta are going to come in remotely. I see her on the screen. In fact, I see them both on the screen, which is always reassuring when you're doing things remotely. Rana is one of the directors in the energy department of UNIDO, as it's called, based in Vienna. The Climate Parliament has a long-standing collaboration with UNIDO, supported by the European Commission, where we work in partnership to help build the capacity of parliamentarians all over the continent of Africa to work on renewable energy. And Rana is our main partner there. This is a partnership between a parliamentary network and a big UN agency, which is quite an unusual thing and very productive, because we have access to national parliaments and can build cross-party groups to help build political will, but we don't have a research department. We rely on people like the CCG research team and UNIDO to have bring in expertise and ideas and so on. And no one's better to do that than Rana. Rana's, although she lives in Vienna and I think may carry an Egyptian passport, if I remember rightly, and spent certainly part of her early years in Lebanon. She's originally Palestinian, And so is her boss, the director of the UNIDO Energy Department, Tariq M. Taira, another of our key partners. This is a project where the Palestinian diaspora is playing an important role. So with all that nonsense, Rana, let's turn over to you and you can say something more intelligent.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Nick, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. I'd just like to start by congratulating you and the team as well from the Climate Parliament, CCG, on the launch of the Green Grids initiative. It's wonderful to see it coming together. I recall attending a meeting in March 2019, also at Wilton Park, where some of the earlier discussions as well happened. And I'm very happy to see that this is already something being launched here today with a clear roadmap. And it's exactly the type of initiatives that we really need today. We need initiatives that can bring the speed and scale that we need for the energy transition to really take a scope across the whole Earth. Now, I just wanted to perhaps also complement a bit some of what has already been said. So, and particularly focus on the relevance of this initiative in relation to energy access, because I mean, in addition to the need for us to really make the grids that are already existing more green and interconnected, there is a challenge that we face today. And that challenge is that we have over 750 million people around the world that have absolutely no access to electricity. Those are also kind of concentrated in around 20 countries that are mostly in Africa. And so we really need to make sure that this finance that is flowing, and so this is something to be considered as well in the financing working group, that it's also flowing more, harmoniously, if you like. Because at the moment, we see that the investments that are flowing in the energy sector are also not uniformly distributed. There's only a few countries that are benefiting from this, and we really need to make sure that the funding flows are going towards more countries. So we also know that, at the moment, we need around $51 billion to be invested to actually address this technology access gap. And at the moment, what is already going into that access gap is only about 12 billion. So we really have over $40 billion annually to be invested as a gap to really address the energy access gap. So how do we make this happen? How do we ensure that the finance working group also looks at and delivers clear recommendations on the access gap, bringing also this? Will mentioned already earlier the small and the big. So how do we bring in also the aspects related to small, community access programs, and how do we connect that also to the grid? Because if we look at the moment at countries like Morocco, Egypt, Ethiopia, Nigeria, there's already quite a lot of good progress and good learnings that can be applied also for other countries. These countries have managed to really bring the price of electricity from solar to a very low, 2 cents per kilowatt hours. That's remarkable. But how do we make that happen in other countries? And how do we make sure that, this scale that is needed through the grids is also there? That is exactly where policies play a role. And I need to say also that when we look at financing, we're not only looking at funding coming from development banks or through grant funding. The private sector also has quite a lot of resources that they would be willing to invest into these programs, provided that there is the right policy environment. And transparent rules, basically, that allow them to really bring the cost of electricity so low. So I think the network, again here, the Green Grids initiative, can really play also a critical role in this exchange of the policies and then making clearer recommendations for countries for taking actions around the policies. And then the third element, and actually like you, Nick, I was also taking note of those three things before Will actually outlined them. And the third one, which is an area that to me personally is very important, and to our organization, which really works a lot on capacity building, basically is also quite important. So the people element and the technology element, we need to really work on empowering countries to build the skills that are needed in the energy sector. And so for that, there is quite a big gap that is there in terms of the quality of the services that are being offered in developing countries, the quality also of the knowledge that they know also about the need for the particularities, if you like, of the installations, the particularities. So it's not just about bringing these technologies to the countries, but it's also about growing a local capacity where countries can also advance on their own. And in doing so, I believe that there is also a big opportunity to engage youth. I mean, we have seen yesterday, at least from my side, remotely, the launch of the Youth Outlook. I mean, there's a great opportunity to bring jobs for youth, particularly in developing countries in that sector. How do we ensure also that the policies that are being put in place provide ample opportunities for youth, provide ample opportunities also for women who remain, in this time, not necessarily well represented in the energy sector. So these are all elements. I mean, I would plea also here that we continue working on together in the Green Grids initiative, and that we also, while we're working on progress to make our climate goals a reality, that we also keep our other goals related to gender equality, to youth empowerment, and so on, and make that happen in parallel as well. I'd stop perhaps here, Nick, and hand over back to you, and happy to address other questions later.
Maybe, Rana, a little bit later, there is a question about the importance of access to energy. Maybe you could expand a little more about the gender aspects of that, because if we can deliver access to local clean energy resources to every community across the developing world, it is going to be transformative for hundreds of millions of women in those communities. And I think that deserves saying a little more about later, and you're the person to say it. But in the meantime, thank you for that introduction, Rana. And next we turn to Jakob Mulagetta, who is from Ethiopia, but like a lot of people in this discussion, isn't living in the country that he's from. He's a professor at University College London of energy policy. He is a co-founder of the African Center for Climate Policy, which is linked to the UN Economic and Social Commission for Africa in Addis. He's a lead author currently in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the big UN scientific panel, but he has been lead author in various reports as well in the past. Basically, Yacob is one of Africa's leading experts on sustainable energy, and he also has the distinction of being the person in charge of international partnerships of all kinds for the Climate Compatible Growth Program. So with that, Jakob, why don't you come in? But just before you start speaking, let me just mention that there's been a couple of questions that you might be able to help answer. One is that people feel we need a bit more of a basic explanation of what continental or even intercontinental grids can do for humanity, and we can come back to that. But another question is, how does this apply in sub-Saharan Africa or in Africa as a whole? And the two questions linked together. Let's just take Africa as an example. We've got the African Union working on what they're calling their power system master plan for a genuinely continental grid from Cairo to Cape Town, from Dakar to Mogadishu, and in the process trying to create an African single electricity market. Why does that make sense for Africa? What's that going to do to help ensure a reliable supply of cheap, clean energy for everyone in Africa? So let's start to answer those questions in the course of your intervention here. Over to you, Yacob.
Well, thank you, Nick, and let me also extend my congratulations to yourself, Sergio, Lucy, and the Climate Parliament community for including some of your trustees who have worked really hard, people like Barry Gardner, Halake Abshiro, who have worked really hard to realize this vision and offer this important pathway for decarbonization, but also avoided emissions for those who are yet to have access, for example. So I think, a lot has been kind of indicated in terms of the what is really happening and in what ways, what were the opportunities that Climate Parliament and colleagues have taken advantage of in order to be able to push the Green Grids initiative forward. I mean, of course, at the heart of it is the urgency of climate change. At the same time, we also have the COVID recovery, but also the deeper kind of questions of development, particularly in from India all the way to Africa, which so that's one aspect of it, of course, and hence this is something that demands thinking big and fast at the same time in order to be able to speed up the energy transition that we all would like to see. I think the issue that Will indicated earlier about some key COP outcomes have been observed. I mean, one is of course the phase out of, or at least the commitment to phase out coal is important. At the same time, over the past few years, also that there's been a groundswell of thinking in terms of electrification of energy, which is quite unprecedented. The whole issue of electrification of transport, industry, cooking. So in many ways, electricity has become almost like a key way by which we can intervene in. My apologies.
I know I switched mine to silent.
Is that mine or?
Go ahead, Yacob. Sorry, there's some kind of mobile phone related. Sorry?
Should I continue or?
I think maybe you're getting a call, Yacob. Do you want to take it? That's just a joke.
You know who that was? That was your Jeremy Webb. Was calling from New Zealand. My apologies. Well, today is my birthday. I think that's why he's.
Oh well, congratulations.
And so I think quite a lot of what we've discussed really fits into the whole the GGI thinking, and I think another key area is of course this question of looking at big in terms of the transmission, but also not to neglect the micro level access questions that Rana and I think Will also mentioned. I mean, I would like to kind of emphasize what Rana was just alluding to, that there are 700 million people who have no access to electricity. So in many ways, this is um, a travesty in terms of our global system that's unable to actually support the poorest people. And one thing that would be a real shame if it and I think it's that's not going to happen. I hope is the worst thing could be that we have these amazing large scale transmission systems that go over villages that we've seen in the past, and I do think that's the whole question around that the transition needs to be pro poor but also just is something which needs to be front and center of this of any initiative going forward that's dealing with climate and development questions. I mean, just to kind of pick up on the couple of points about moving into continental grids in the context of Africa, I think the issue of regional integration has been there for quite some time. Much of that has been in political integration. I'm talking about Africa here, political integration, but as well as trade integration. And some of us who were at the UN Economic Commission for Africa were proposing, well, can there be some other way by which we can also think about integration? Energy, for example. This is going back 10 years or so. So in many ways, what the Green Grids Initiative does is really extends this dream of integration in a concrete way. That if there is integrating productive sectors across countries, but also within countries, is something which has been in the thinking of some people, but hadn't been realized for a number of reasons. And so for Climate Parliament and the Green Grids Initiative to step into this space, taking advantage of those opportunities, is something which should be commended. We know that, for example, the power pools are there, but they may be to some extent weak financially as well as institutionally to push much deeper into the whole question of energy integration. And so these master plans, or the PIDA, which is the program for infrastructure and infrastructural development in Africa, has been there, and there is some really good thinking. And in fact, the other day we had the Africa Green Grids Initiative working group discussing this question of integrating different ideas. And so the GGI offers the possibility to pull together different initiatives into a common kind of pathway. And so I think ultimately it goes back to the question of you still have over 600 million people who don't have access to electricity across Africa, and so this offers that that possibility. But also, I mean, you do have some countries, for example, who have who generate more power than they can use, and so and this is nothing unusual. Producing stuff is only part of the problem, but also moving stuff from one point to another is the key. And I think the transmission across countries and across regions is something which certainly addresses this question, and we expect that the energy access question at least partially would be addressed by creating these superhighway transmissions, as well as that ultimately lead us to distribution and last mile into people's homes and industries and so forth. So I'm not going to take any longer, but one other thing to finish with, Nick, is of course financing is the key issue. I mean, yesterday we heard in one of the side events from a team at Oxford that the world has invested or managed to raise $17 trillion for COVID recovery, out of which 14.5 of that has been for rescue spending, and 3 trillion of it is for recovery, but only less than 500 billion can really be classified as green recovery spending. So there's still quite a lot of headspace that needs to be looked at in terms of scaling up spending, even if COVID spending, into the greener kind of territory. And at the moment, I don't think we're there yet, but certainly what we have seen is that the world can, with all the political will and the persistence that Climate Parliament has shown us, that it is possible to think big and to think fast. So let me stop there, Nick, in the interest of involving other people in our discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Yacob. And what better slogan for us? Think big and think fast. That's what we've got to do, because on climate change, we're completely out of time. I mean, to have a good chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, according to the IPCC, the latest IPCC report, the carbon budget that they calculate we could still use up, the carbon dioxide we can put in the atmosphere between now and forever, because the stuff hangs around for centuries in the atmosphere, is roughly the equivalent of 4 years' worth of current greenhouse gas emissions. To have a two-thirds chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, we're talking 6-7 years. We are just completely out of time. So before we come to the critical issue of finance and then come back to the access issue, which questions on which we've had questions in both cases, and I propose that we use quite a lot of our remaining 15 minutes on those two key questions, because the questioners are quite right. These are key areas of focus, and I may say the Climate Parliament and Will and his colleagues in the UK team have been really making sure that energy access remains a key part of the Green Grids agenda that this Green Grids initiative is addressing. But just on the question that has had a number of people vote for it, I think, looking at the screen there, of the basic explanation about what these large-scale grids can do. Just to say a further word about that. The starting point is, if we give up fossil fuels in all parts of the world very, very fast in order to stay within that safe global carbon budget, where is all the clean energy going to come from? And Sergio talked about this, that rooftop solar isn't enough. And the answer has to be that quite a lot of it is going to come from large-scale solar power stations in the deserts. If you took an area of desert 400 kilometers by 400 kilometers, so about 250 miles by 250 miles, and cover that with solar power stations, you could produce all the electricity the world produces today from all its power stations. You don't do that in one place. You take that sort of imaginary box and you break it into thousands and thousands of pieces and scatter them across the deserts and drylands of the world. But it just gives you an idea of the scale of resources available in the world's deserts in terms of solar, if we can wire them up, if we have the long-distance grids that enable us to bring that energy from the places with the best solar radiation, which are the deserts, to the cities and factories and cars, to the demand centers around the world. So that's one thing we have to do. And then, as Sergio mentioned earlier, we've got to connect time zones, because in any particular location, you only get, even in the summer, you only get decent solar for about maybe maximum 8 hours a day, usually a bit less. But if you can connect east-west over many different time zones, you can actually get solar power from somewhere for much of the 24-hour cycle. Same thing applies with wind power. Wind power is a variable resource, very variable in any particular location. And in order to make it a reliable resource, we have to harness it over a wide area. So, for example, take Northern Europe, which is very windy. As weather fronts move across, they generate wind, but not always in the same place. You've got to be able to bring the wind from wherever the fronts are generating wind at that time. Northern European wind drops in the summer and rises in the winter. Moroccan wind is a desert wind. It's a tremendous wind resource on the Moroccan coast, but it rises in the summer and drops in the winter. Put the two together, you get much more seasonal reliability. And then you need to connect both with the hydro resources we already have in mountain ranges, so that hydro, which is a form of stored energy, can help to balance fluctuations in wind and sun. Let me just mention before we go on, once again, that people who do want to put in questions, though we are running out of time for answering them, can do so on slido.com, and the number again is 424-241. But let's come to this critical question of how on earth are we going to pay for all this? And I'm going to ask Mark to speak in a moment. And the questioner also asked, give us an example, a clear example of a project that perhaps got financed or is about to get financed. What did it have to do to qualify for that finance? And I'm looking at you, Will. You're supposed to be an expert on this stuff. Maybe you can, while Mark's speaking, think of an example. When we come to access, I'll come back to Rana on the gender dimension, but I also see that in the audience we have someone who's really on the cutting edge of energy access, and that's Simon Batchelor, who's one of the people running another big program like CCG that's being funded by British Development Assistance called the Modern Energy Cooking Services Program, MEX. And maybe if you're agreeable, Simon, I'll just ask you to say a word about this critical issue, the role of clean cooking in the energy access revolution. So, Mark, over to you.
Thanks very much. Just if you want to come to this mic, Simon, when you're ready. I want to come back to the question you asked right at the beginning, Nick, and that is, what can countries do to get themselves ready? The checklist. What is it that they should go through and start working on? And something that we're doing at CCG and in partnership, obviously, is to think about how we can identify key issues, separate those into a set of milestones that countries have to meet, and then phase those sensibly. And this is really important because a lot of the issues that have to be addressed go well beyond just one sort of siloed government department or one siloed financial organization or structure and so on. And by delineating this, it allows us to create really meaningful partnerships and then things that governments can sort of plug into and take advantage of what's out there. And to give you an idea of some of the really quite discrete issues that we can separate out, these first just go to things like national position. Is this in our interest or not? And if it is, what's the potential gains? And that's the sort of thing that the president or someone like that would like to know. And that's a certain sphere of decision making. Then we go on to things like the overall management and structure of this. It's a non-trivial thing to work out. Then the financing, and we'll have a whole session about financing coming up, and new simplified rules to be sure that we can get access to blended finance faster. Then there'll be things around the legal framework, the regulatory framework, and how we operate with the regulators and system operators in a very clear and systematic way. Then when it comes to the grid design, I think there's a massive opportunity here as well. So we have to do some grid design. This is a technical space. Again, it has its own community that needs to be engaged sensibly. But we can tag on to this things like making sure that access to grids for all is included, as well as things around storage and other bits and pieces that are important for that enabling environment. And then just to rattle through a couple of others that are critical. Then the human resource development, we need different types of skills, how they get to be phased into a national program, making sure that stakeholders are systematically involved where they need to be involved, ensure there's the appropriate environmental protection, emergency planning in case there is some sort of an issue. I mean, these grids, they're wonderful. They'll connect us and create a kind of cooperation that's valuable, which brings risks. And so how do we plan around those risks and make sure that we end up with an optimal system? And then there'll be other things around understanding what industrial involvement is potentially possible as you set out this new grid system. What do you want to try and endogenize in country, import or not, and so on. And then and there are a couple of other things. And so having this very detailed, structured sort of milestone approach that we can phase in a sensible way, possibly, and we're working this out with some of the key countries we're involved in, but possibly setting up some sort of interim structure that just helps pull all of these things together, because it's an anti-siloed approach, but at the same time we need to make it manageable. So and looking forward to working on this together with our partners, but also, for example, the awesome international organizations that are out there like GPSD, RETA. I wish somebody had thought about putting global in front of that, because we would have gotten a lot of airtime. But and so on, and there are a number of them. But creating a clear, functional framework, I think, will be critical. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. And in Mark, you've been hearing from what everyone on the field tells me is one of the world's leading energy modelers. In fact, I think they did think about putting global ahead of it, Mark, and they decided that maybe it wasn't going to be such a great acronym after all, so they dropped it. Now, Carla's reminding me that we're down to about 5 or 6 minutes, so we'll just very briefly, the question I put to you, an example of some exciting project that has, well, anyway, say something.
Given that this is probably the last time I get to speak, I just wanted to say a little bit about the finance. Great questions, by the way, so thanks to the audience, because you're really kind of picking up the essence of all of this. I just wanted to say a little bit about where the money's going to come from. In case there's any UK taxpayers listening, or any other taxpayers for that matter, there's been some mention of Rolls-Royces and stately homes in some of the discussion here, and I just wanted to sort of put some minds at ease about what it is we're trying to do and what it isn't we're trying to do. There's a lot of grand schemes being talked about here, and we're talking about how much money it's all going to be and so on. I think the thing I wanted to just say was that we deliberately have not tried to raise a big pot of new money when creating this Green Grids initiative. We have deliberately not tried to create a great big new international institution. There's a lot of international institutions already on energy. There's a lot of financing institutions with a lot of money in them. There's a lot of private money. So we are not trying to reinvent those things. What we are trying to do is be the oil wheels of those things so they move more easily, connect with each other better, and get a smoother transformation from project plans through to completion. So it's not a Rolls-Royce. It's I think with a nod to our Italian partners in COP26, I would say it was a Fiat Punto, but I would say we are racing as fast as we can. You can go pretty fast in a Fiat Punto, and you can squeeze quite a few people in. So we're pretty packed, COVID safe, windows open, but we're going as fast as we can, and possibly breaking some speed limits along the way, we hope. So that just to say the sort of nature of this thing is the other quick thing I wanted to say was the reason we added an S to the word grid and it's now Green Grids is coming to the point about this. What is this kind of intercontinental thing? I was very keen that this wasn't seen as a grand master plan being cooked up by somebody somewhere in whichever ivory tower of pulling the levers. This is a pretty bottom-up democratic process. We talked about the politics before. It's not going to work unless people feel ownership of this. It reflects their needs. That's why the community grids are so important, both from a political point of view, but also from a technical point of view. They've got to connect it up with each other. Great. I really want to make sure that Simon has a chance to say something, because I think cooking is absolutely essential to this, and the access debate and the gender debate and everything. So I haven't got time to talk about all of this, but grids, plural, is a very aggregate, exercise we're involved in here, not a sort of blueprint being imposed on people from above. So I'll stop.
All right,
Otherwise
thanks, thanks, Will. The fact that we are frustrated that we can't get through it all on time available is a good sign. It means that there's a lot more still to discuss. But very briefly, I know you're a master of synthesizing things into brief remarks, Rana. Just say a word more about access and gender, and then we'll give Simon the last word. But we are running out of time, I'm afraid, so it's like 1 or 2 minutes. Go ahead, Rana.
Sorry, I will try to be as brief as I can, but I can't resist the temptation of sharing 2 examples, actually, because that's also something requested by the audience. I would encourage everyone to look into the Ebrd GCF funded program for Egypt on renewable energy. I think that is really a very nice example of how we can make things happen. There is a vision and a commitment from the government on a certain percentage for renewable energy. There is a regulatory framework, and then comes a development bank to work with a financial institution and deliver, the funding and the capacity building that is needed. That is available online. Everyone can look at that. Another example linked to energy access is a program that we, as UNIDO, have started also with funding from the global. From the Green Climate Fund, in Zambia, in fact. With the energy access issue, if we really want to make sure we reach the last mile and we reach all, women, youth, everyone, we really need to work more on energy planning also to match what energy is being delivered on the supply side with the needs of the local communities. And this is where Zambia has really championed work on energy planning. So they do have a clear plan, both for growing their grids, but also for the needs of the local communities that need mini grids. So there, as UNIDO, we are coming in to work with the Rural Electrification Agency in Zambia on delivering, access to local communities, primarily also by helping growing local businesses and testing new business models that could deliver that access. And there, again, there is a role, because we keep on talking about women and their role in the energy transition in Africa, basically as the collectors and distributors of the firewood, but that's not the case. They can actually be really active agents of change and entrepreneurs that could help in delivering this access. And we see brilliant examples in Kenya, for example, of young women that are bringing energy solutions for irrigation, for example. So using the energy as a service model to really tackle the issues of farmers. So again, going back to this linkage of where energy comes in, not just as a supply, but also as connecting with the demand that is needed on the ground. It's really unfortunate we're running out of time. There's quite a lot to be said, and I would have loved to be there in person. Let me say, I'm really jealous that you're all there, and it's not fair being on this side. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you actually, hopefully next week in person, and continuing some of this discussion.
Thanks, Rana. And you've raised a really key point here, which is one of the key ideas behind the Green Grids Initiative. There's a simple way of helping everyone to go faster, and that is sharing experience of what's succeeding in this or that country more efficiently. If what's going on in Zambia is working, we need to share it with other developing countries right away. But before we wrap up, we have a time issue here too, because Simon Batchelor is actually capable of delivering a fascinating 1-hour presentation about clean cooking, and I've seen him do it to our members of Parliament. Just before COVID hit, we had him doing it at a big parliamentary roundtable we had in Abu Dhabi. But now, Simon, it has to be the 1-minute Reader's Digest abridged version. So over to you.
Mildly embarrassed to actually be asked, because I didn't want to take time away from Will, so we'd try and do 30 seconds. All of this is fantastic, but I'm characterized as dealing with cooking. Cooking has been marginalized. In SDG 7, you get 7.1.1, which is about access, and 7.1.2, cooking. And actually, those two need to come together. Over the coming decade, we need to bring them together. And then it's also been isolated from 7.2, which is about renewable energy, and 7.3, which is about energy efficiency. We need to bring SDG 7 back together, and this Green Grids initiative is exactly what we need. We need to strengthen the grid, we need to strengthen the access to modern energy, we need to move away from fossil fuels, and my last point, 2 billion people are going to be added to the population by 2050. Most of those 2 billion people will be in countries that are currently cooking with polluting fuels. And there's going to be massive urban migration as well. Bring all those together. We need a solid continental green grid that feeds into our cities. Thanks, Nick.
Okay, thanks, Simon. And in case anyone at the end of this session still thinks that we're lacking expertise, knowledge, and ideas in this room, the virtual room, including our virtual speakers, let me just mention that as everyone knows, Africa leads the world in using mobile phones to make payments and to manage money. And that began, I believe, with the M-Pesa program in Kenya, if I'm not mistaken. And the person who dreamed that up is our very same Simon Batchelor. So he definitely deserves the applause that he just got. So I think with that, if I don't wrap up, Carla will come over and kill me. So we'd better leave it here. I can only say a huge thank you to all of the brilliant people who've spoken in this session, and I think we should give them all a big round of applause at the end.
Thank you also to Nick. Without his vision, time, and commitment, the GGI wouldn't exist. Nick's the founder of the GGI, so big thanks to Nick.